A very good afternoon, everyone, colleagues and friends. I'm welcoming those joining us virtually via YouTube this afternoon, as well as everyone present here in the audience. My name is Anel du Plessis. I'm the incumbent of the NRF CLES chair based at the Faculty of Law of the Northwest University. I'm delighted to officially open this second annual postgraduate lecture with a word of welcome on behalf of the Faculty of Law from the side of our Deputy Dean, Professor Michelle Barnard.
Thank you, Anel. Good afternoon to the organizers of this event, colleagues from our own institution as well as others, students, invited guests, and also people present here in person this afternoon, as well as all participants joining us online. As Anel has just stated, and thank you so much, Anel, my name is Michelle Barnard, and I am the Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Law. And on behalf of the Northwest University, the Faculty of Law, and the Executive Dean, Dr. Nayo Murray, allow me to extend a warm welcome to the second annual Prestige Lecture of the South African Research Chair in Cities, Law and Environmental Sustainability, or CLES in short. On that note, thank you to Prof Anel and to Bernalee Anthony, as well as the team at the CLES for organizing and hosting this event this afternoon. I'm very much looking forward to the activities this afternoon. A special word of welcome then to our speaker this afternoon, Prof Tracy-Lynn Field, who will be addressing us on the topic of the academic role in the just transition. Having had the pleasure of working with Tracy, I wanted to call you Prof Field in my speech, but I'm not going to, Tracy. It feels too awkward. Working with Tracy on a number of occasions. I'm looking forward to another thought-provoking exchange with you, Tracy. Before engaging on the subject, allow me to hand over to Prof Anel du Plessis to provide some background to the CLES, as well as the thoughts behind the Prestige Lecture series. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Barnard. Ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to also warmly welcome you on behalf of the NRF CLES chair. So this research chair, as its name suggests, is being funded by the National Research Foundation of South Africa, but its activities are also funded by other institutions, such as the Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and the South African Local Government Association. The Faculty of Law was awarded this chair in 2018, and this year marks the 4th year of its existence. The research agenda of the chair revolves around critical engagement with the role and place of cities in environmental sustainability and addressing the global environmental and climate crisis. We look at this through the lens of law and through the use of mixed research methodologies. So it's important for us, as you can imagine, to also make use of non-doctrinal legal research methods. So who's the us that I am referring to? At the chair, I'm working with a cohort of approximately 12 full-time student researchers and postdoctoral fellows. And the students are working towards the completion of either LLB final year dissertations, master's theses, and doctoral studies. And the postdoctoral fellows work on a series of articles for a period ranging from any time between 1 year and 3 years. We are devoted to student development and research capacity building, but we certainly also aim at high-quality scholarly publication and science engagement. We pride ourselves in activities and achievements of different kinds, and in 2021, that is last year, we, as the team at CLES, for example, saw to the following, and please allow me this little bit of bragging this afternoon. Two edited volumes were published, 8 scholarly book chapters were published, 13 peer-reviewed scholarly articles were authored and published, 1 technical report was published with the South African Cities Network, 28 national conference presentations were presented, 17 international conference presentations were presented. 1 PhD and 3 master's students graduated, the 2 master's students with distinction, and our PhD graduate having been, and she's here in the audience this afternoon, Nicolene, the youngest ever PhD graduate at the Faculty of Law of the Northwest University. 2 further PhDs and 1 LLM student submitted for examination last year and since graduated, the master's student also with distinction. 2 LLB dissertations were passed with distinction, and 1 of those students received the prize for the best LLB dissertation for 2021. That was done by Heloise Hutting. We presented 9 public webinars and virtual colloquia, including the first annual CLES Prestige Lecture, which was an all-virtual event at the time. We had one 3-day student conference, a national postgraduate student conference, and we co-hosted that with Salga. 3 editions of our newsletter called CLES Impress were published, and we also edited and published 6 peer-reviewed articles in the CLES special series, which forms part of the Potchefstroom Electronic Law Journal. We established an open access online depository with information on climate change law and governance developments in cities from different countries in Southern Africa. And this is still continuously being updated with the assistance also of the University Library. And then we assisted and continue to do so UN Habitat's Urban Lex Open Access Depository in terms of a formal MOU that we have with UN Habitat. This year, we added to our activities a few new things, including a podcast series, CLES Talk, and we commenced with 2 new research projects in specific African countries and cities with a focus on climate change law, governance, and project development. So this is a mouthful, ladies and gentlemen, and we trust that through these outputs and activities, we are gradually and constructively contributing to the science and scholarship in the field of cities law and environmental sustainability. As this overview of our activities suggests, we divide our time between many different activities, one of which is the creation of opportunities where different stakeholders and audiences can critically engage on matters of concern to all of us, academics, students, government officials, NGOs, community members, and political influencers. One of these opportunities, which really has us quite excited, is the annual Prestige Lecture, a public event where we invite an individual who has made a mark in his or her field and who we deem a thought leader and an example of research excellence and innovation to address us. Last year, we had Kobie Brandt, the Deputy Secretary General of CLES. She presented in our then all-virtual event on the role of research, teaching and learning in tertiary institutions for improved local governance in South Africa. Now this year, we have, as you heard, a long-standing colleague and friend of many of us, Prof Tracy-Lynn Field, who will address us on the academic role in the just transition and the navigation of a landscape of change. I'm sure that I need not emphasize how important this topic is, especially in a country such as South Africa, and that it's important for us to deliberate the meaning, the pace, the requirements, and the possible unintended consequences of the just transition. We need to talk and critically and carefully think about what this means in the era we live in, where the only constant is change. So without any further ado, I'm inviting to the front Nonhlanhla Nkobo, a PhD candidate at CLES, to do a proper introduction of Professor Tracy Humby, and I invite you to enjoy the remainder of the events. Thank you.
Many thanks, Professor. Mine is a very important task, but I will try to keep it as short as my height. So today we are welcoming Professor Tracy-Lynn Field. She is the Claude Lyon Chair in Earth Justice and Stewardship at Wits University. She has over 20 years experience in both teaching as well as research, particularly in the fields of environmental justice and the use or the misuse of the Earth's endowments for the present and future generation. She has also published extensively both in national and international peer-reviewed academic journals, and in popular media as we know it today. Professor Field has also successfully supervised more than 30 LLM students and PhD students. Professor Field also engages in consultative work with national and international organizations, and through her academic career, she has also worked extensively with non-government organizations and active group or activist groups that work in fighting for environmental justice and environmental human rights. On an interesting side note, something that I could never do, Professor Field is a musician and a creative writer, and she's a mother of 3 human and 7 furry children. Without wasting any further time, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Professor Tracy-Lynn Field.
Well, I need to take off my glasses to see you properly and then to put them on to read this properly. So, good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I haven't been on this campus since before lockdown. I remember being in this room when I think it was Climate Change Law and Governance was launched. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here with warm bodies in the room, but also to greet everyone online. I greet you all. So I wanted to start, and I do think that this mouthful that Anel just spouted forth deserves a bigger round of applause. Wow. Wow, Anel. So I want to start my talk today by thanking you, the Saatchi Chair in Cities Law and Environmental Sustainability, for entrusting me with the 2nd annual Prestige Lecture. Anel, we have known each other as colleagues for more than 15 years, and I am pleased that this occasion affords me the opportunity to publicly declare my immense admiration and respect for you as a scholar, a teacher, a supervisor, and as a woman. Your contribution to South African environmental law and to the environmental dimensions of local government law is unparalleled, and you are without a doubt the leading scholar in the field. Your positive energy, your can-do attitude, your efficiency, and above all, the goodness of you, Anel, has always inspired me. So the prestige of this occasion is yours, and I hope that my talk today does it justice. So the topic I want to address today is a complex one. The title is The Academic Role in the Just Transition, Navigating a Landscape of Change. And I invoked the just transition because it has become a kind of shorthand to refer to the inevitability of change, a desired process of change, and a future outcome. But as I prepared the talk, I realized that I wanted it to refer to more than a social compact for achieving equality, well-being, and prosperity on a journey towards net zero carbon emissions and climate resilience. Instead, I needed to stand for something much broader, which I believe is the human need for hope. And as I will elaborate shortly, I believe academics also need hope to believe in a better world. So many of you who have joined us today know that the Presidential Climate Commission has finalized and broadly consulted on a framework for a just transition in South Africa. And this framework document is full of hope, new and better jobs, growing the economy, protecting the environment, improving human health, more equity, more inclusivity, more climate smartness. It is an island of optimism in a sea of despairing pessimism about our country. Our leadership, our crime situation, our crumbling institutions, our inflation, our racism, our xenophobia, our disappearing wildlife, our polluted environments. The list goes on and on. Some people I've spoken to, serious academics, dismiss the framework for a just transition as a Panglossian adventure, a pie-in-the-sky strategy blithely disconnected from the grim realities most South Africans have to endure. I think they miss the role that the just transition is playing to signify hope, to hold on to hope as a kind of freedom and collective agency in the sense of Viktor Frankl's tragic optimism, and I will say more about this later. So in my talk today, I want to talk about change. I want to talk about the impact of change, And then 2 strategies that I've found helpful in my own personal and professional life for dealing with change and uncertainty. And those strategies center on having hope, believing in a better future, and staying present and engaged. So my focus naturally falls on what these strategies mean for the academic role and academic agency. So allow me to start then with the theme of change. There can be no doubt that our generation is living in a complex, plural, and volatile world. To quote Brazilian Supreme Court Justice Luis Roberto Barroso, a world in which the limits and possibilities of law are being shaken by the speed, depth, and extent of ongoing transformations. The thing about these transformations is that they're not necessarily convergent. In fact, we seem to be suspended between profoundly different utopian and dystopian future worlds. And I was struck recently, I got an invitation in my inbox for a talk by anthropologist Abu Farman, and how well he captured these disjunctive narratives. So this is how the advert went. Technoscience, with promises of immortality and space colonies, continues unfettered on its path of technological expansion, projecting and developing inevitable post-human possibilities. And Farman's research includes things like cryogenics and people sustaining themselves in liquid so that they can wake up 200 years from now and be cured of dementia. At the same time, scientists are projecting an unavoidable future of devastating climate change and social and ecological collapse. Many of you will know that paradigm very well. On both sides, the sense of inevitability is changing the open and free future promised by modernity and secular humanism. So there you have 3 paradigms: technoscience, climate change collapse, and then the paradigm that we know of secular humanism and modernity, which promises us agency. Farman's point is to underline the grammar of inevitability that characterizes the discourses of technoscience and climate change. The inevitability of a world where Mars is colonized, robots with human-like skin live among us, artificial intelligence makes work redundant, humans are able to reverse age. Do you know that they're able to do that with mice? The inevitability of on the other hand, the inevitability of a much warmer world with fewer species, more fragile ecosystems, more extreme events, coastal inundation, food insecurity, deteriorating infrastructure, more ill health and premature death, more violence and conflict. In this kind of world, who wants to live forever, as Freddie Mercury asked? Now, while Farman highlights the inevitability of these discourses, others highlight their incongruity, their ridiculous contrast. So last year, there was a piece written by activist Tracy Davies, who works for Just Share. And she wrote it in August at about the same time that Jeff Bezos went into space. And the piece is titled, "Call Me a Taxi, Mr. Spaceman." In it, she comments on media coverage on the one hand, multi-billionaire Jeff Bezos' 11-minute joyride into space, and on the other, the taxi-related violence that left hundreds of thousands of commuters stranded in Cape Town. The news broadcast I was listening to, she writes, reported the Bezos story, then moved straight to reports that people were spending hours walking to and from work in Cape Town to avoid losing their jobs. It was a ridiculous contrast. A fabulously wealthy man zooming around in orbit with thousands of people trudged for hours along the N2 in the rain. So in the juggernaut of change happening all around us, it matters, therefore, where you stand, geographically, in terms of your gender, your race, and your class. The speed, depth, and extent of these ongoing transformations shake the foundations of law because their seeming inevitability and incongruity point to the failure of the institutions undergirding the third future world, the open and free world promised by modernity and secular humanism. We have all watched in horror, and it's horrific because we see this unfold on our screens, as the institutions of international law have failed to prevent the systemic destruction of Ukraine, the site of a war that is as much about rhetoric, disinformation, and hypocrisy as it is about bombs, bullets, bodies, and blood. Those who work in the field of environmental law are tired of lamenting the slow-moving horror story of international climate change law. At home, we have become disillusioned with our constitutional order and the freedoms and rights it promised for all of us, as systemic inequality, racism, patriarchy, homophobia, and a whole other range of phobias stubbornly persist. The thing about the world promised by modernity and secular humanism is that it seemed to offer a measure of universal individual and collective agency through democratic self-rule, a liberal economic order, equality before the law, universal access to education, freedoms that earlier generations had not enjoyed. We believed we can create a better world. The speed and extent of change in the contemporary world is therefore traumatic because we sense our agency crumbling with these institutions. Now, I wanted to say a little more about how these inevitabilities and incongruencies play out in an academic space. So for the past 20 years, I've been privileged to call an academic institution my employer. And in those 20 years, I've witnessed significant and accelerating change. I've watched and been solicited into the new managerialism and audit culture that obsesses about university world rankings, research outputs, and performance, which is the price tag for inclusion in a globalized system of higher learning. From 2016 onwards, I have seen how our campuses became battlegrounds for running students, tear gas, and rubber bullets, as that same new managerialism, audit culture, and a mismanaged and intransigent state made higher education inaccessible for the majority of young people. And while there were good outcomes to that, and I think the National Student Financial Aid Scheme is one of those things, that it's helping hundreds of thousands of students realize their aspirations for higher learning. Fees must fall also engendered, and the response to it, engendered an increased securitization of our campuses and a growing distance between academics and students, which obviously massively escalated as a result of emergency remote teaching that we had to undertake during COVID lockdown. So while we romantically reminisce about a return to normal, we live with the disjunctures, and these disjunctures are the wonders of MS Teams and e-learning platforms that allow one to track student learning and to do all other sorts of weird and wonderful things, and the fact that our students don't have data, or that they flicker in and out of our online lectures in line with Eskom's load shedding schedule. We live with the incongruity of entering our campuses with sophisticated equipment that can read our hand waves, and yet we know that some of our students don't have enough to eat. At the same time, and I'm speaking to academics, and I don't think enough has been said about academics. Academics are asked to do more with less in a world where knowledge generation seems to be accelerating at a breakneck speed. More advocacy and op-ed writing, more externally funded projects, more research outputs in world-class journals, more interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, more decolonization. But you can, some people just can do it, like Professor Nel. So it is as if we as academics are caught up, that we're powerless in these systems that are massively effective and efficient in some ways, but also massively inefficient and even cruel and vicious in other ways. And through all of these changes that I've described, we've valiantly soldiered on with the academic project. But what is the academic project in a world that is complex and plural and volatile, caught between the futuristic dreams of Elon Musk and Greta Thunberg's most strident warnings of climate collapse? A world that might be significantly transformed even within a relatively short period of time. And we've seen what's happened in KZN, a holiday destination like Umhloti. I don't know if those of you who've been there. Devastated by the looting last year, chemical fire, devastation of the Mhlanga Lagoon, and now the floods, the dunes collapsing, and how quickly that particular point has been transformed. So as academics, how do we position ourselves in this world? What is our agency and what is our hope? So I want to say something now about the impact of this, because I think I would be shortchanging you if I went on immediately to a kind of problem-solving mode and said, okay, so how do we navigate this landscape of change? I think we need to just spend a moment to reflect how it impacts us. I've seen in my own life and in the lives of my colleagues, in the working of my institution, that these changes are having a significant effect. So on the surface, academic staff have rolled with the punches. And as they've resurfaced again and again after yet another series of challenges, one could say that they've built a certain resilience. So this is really the core idea of resilience theory, which is core to a lot of climate change work. That intermittent stress is essential to the sustainability of a system, that we evolve by adapting to and transcending the storms that we have to face. The opposite is also true, that systems that are artificially protected from stresses may thrive for a while, but sooner or later, the lack of opportunities to adapt will make those systems far more vulnerable. So think, for example, of the countries that have adopted a zero COVID approach. And those like South Africa that have opted for an approach where, based on the premise that we need to learn to live with the virus. So I recently had the opportunity to engage with a fellow writer who's based in Florida, and she was reflecting that she didn't want to have to travel because she was afraid she'd be detained upon her return to the United States of America. I wish they would just lift these restrictions and allow everyone to just get it over and done with, she said. So in South Africa, the latest COVID zero prevalence survey from March 2022 shows that 98% of South African adults have either been vaccinated against COVID or had COVID or both. Only 10% of those included in the study had been vaccinated without being infected by COVID. The number of COVID-related deaths have plummeted, and our healthcare services have learned to cope. We have become a more resilient nation. But of course, there has been an enormous cost, and just as almost everyone in South Africa has either had COVID or been vaccinated, I'm sure there's not a single person who hasn't been affected either by the loss of a loved one or known someone who suffered a COVID-related loss. And this is the cost of resilience. So from this building resilience perspective, change is a good thing. Stress is a good thing. It stops us from stagnating. It keeps us on our toes. It is a sine qua non for evolution. But resilience theory also teaches that in the face of multiple stresses, systems can break down. As links in the multiple feedback loops that drive a system break, or as the nodes in that system are obliterated, a tipping point may be reached, where the system starts to change, where it becomes impossible to go back to normal. The system changes, switches to something completely different, and often to a degraded state, according to our human value systems. Climate change and Earth system science have been warning for many years that a number of our ecological systems face such tipping points. But the same is true of any system, including the system of public higher education. The stresses may be too hard and too frequent. Every time we bounce back, we do so with a little less energy, a little less motivation than before. We are like batteries that never get a chance to get fully charged. We are running down slowly. I see the red flags everywhere, in my own life, in the lives of my colleagues, in the working of my institution. Overwork, alienation, depression, burnout, apathy, resentment, disillusionment, conflict, emigration, resignation. And as these pathologies take hold, the deterioration of the system accelerates. So, how do we navigate a landscape of change? How, as academics, do we position ourselves and function in this landscape of change that will allow us not only to become resilient, but also to flourish and thrive? So in the second part of my talk, I want to talk about two strategies, two ways of staying anchored and centered and on course in a landscape of change. The first strategy is simply, it centers on hope. and the importance of hope and having a teleological worldview. And the second strategy is staying present and engaged. And in speaking about these strategies, I'm drawing on my own personal and professional experience of 20-odd years. And so I want to do more than just impart tips about how to survive in academia in the 21st century in South Africa. What I want to share is in the nature of ways of being and knowing and feeling that I've found helpful in my own journey. So, the importance of hope. I think it's essential. It's essential to have hope in a better future, to live with a teleological worldview. I mentioned the Just Transition framework at the start of this lecture, and I noted how it's vision of an empowered, healthy citizenry living in a society that is more economically inclusive and less environmentally damaging fulfills an important function. It signifies hope. It leads us on to something better. When you think about it, when you reflect, you see that we are actually immersed in teleological beliefs about growth and progress and perfection. In his exposition on the idea of teleology, philosopher Ernest Meyer points out that teleological thinking is widespread in many religions and in the beliefs of primitive people, a trust in the intrinsic tendency of nature toward progress or an ultimate goal. With Christianity as a major source of support, teleological thinking gained increasing traction in Western philosophy. So teleological thinking only becomes remarkable when you think about the opposites, and that's connected to an equally ancient worldview, which leads back to Democritus, and holds that the ebb and the flow of life has no direction at all. That everything is just mechanistic, happens by chance. There's no direction. And these conflicting orientations to the nature of existence in the future still exist today. Our constitutional order is steeped in a teleological worldview. Look at the preamble to the Constitution, an open and democratic society in which the divisions of the past have been healed, an improved quality of life for all citizens, every person freed to realize the potential social justice, respect for fundamental human rights. Teleology has become entrenched in our canons of adjudication and interpretation. Who can stop anymore with the literal meaning of a legal text? So as a first step, I think it's important for every academic to have a teleological view, to have the hope for some form of better future, and that this is preferable to just thinking, it's preferable to cynicism, and it's preferable to believing that things just cycle over and over again with no direction. This must be a future that touches your heart, that tugs on your emotions, and you must feel it in your heart and your gut. If there is no emotional resonance, it's not a future you care about. So since I was a young child, I knew that I cared about the natural world and our relationship to it, and I cared about the underdog. And in environmental contexts, it's not difficult to find these two concerns converging. So the teleology of a world where we respect, protect, live in harmony with, are connected with, love the non-human world. And a world where there is justice for the marginalized and the voiceless has been a constant theme in my work as an academic over 20 years. As I've matured, I've become quite specific and intentional about the teleologies that guide my work. For example, in the months prior to taking up the role of the Chair of Earth Justice and Stewardship, I thought carefully how to organize my work program. I decided on 4 areas of work. One is what I call framing, which is about sovereignties and stewardship. And then there's water, energy, and biodiversity. And for each of these areas, I meditated on the kind of change I wanted to see at the end of my 5-year tenure as a chair. In my water work, for example, I would like to see protection of South Africa's strategic water source areas and sanitation dignity. In my energy work, I would like to see Africa getting a better deal as it exchanges its mineral resources to fuel the energy transition in the global north. In my work on biodiversity, I want to see a nature-supporting developmental pathway for Africa that reverses immoral and inequitable disposition of Africa's resources and the immoral institution of African debt. I have written these teleologies down as part of my work program. I reflect on them at the start of every month when I consider what I want to achieve in that month. At the start of every quarter, I plan a retreat in nature, normally a multi-day hike, where I revisit these teleologies and I decide whether they need to be tweaked, expanded, or discarded so that they live and they grow with me. These teleologies not only guide me, they also guide the work of my postgraduate students. So when I meet a postgraduate student for the first time, the very first thing I try and do is understand what touches that student's heart, what their teleology might be, and whether it meshes with mine. So in addition to having some kind of very specific view, I think it's important that you love it and that it becomes integrally interwoven with your day-to-day, weekly, monthly, or yearly intention setting. But now, here's the thing, right? I also think that you shouldn't hold onto this too tightly. You need to hold onto it quite loosely, not quite believing that it'll ever be realized, or at least realized in your own lifetime. I think this is where many academics trip themselves up. They cling to their teleology too rigidly, and when they perceive that things aren't moving or not moving as quickly as they would like them to move, they become disillusioned and cynical and negative, and their destructive energy ripples through the entire academy. A couple of years ago, I listened to a wonderful talk by a meditation teacher called Tara Brach, and it's titled Earth's Crisis on the Edge of the Roof. And at one point of the speech, she acknowledges out of a position of sadness and love that we want to feel like we can save the earth. We want to feel certain of it before we take a step. We want to feel some certainty as we are taking steps. If we don't have that sense of certainty or reassurance, we may start feeling resigned. We may want to give up. And the truth is, she continues, that we don't know. We just don't know. She quotes Wendell Berry, who said, "We don't have a right to know whether we are going to succeed or not. The only question we have a right to ask is, what is the next right thing to do?" She also quotes Thomas Merton, who said, "Do not depend on the hope of results. You may have to face the fact that your work will be apparently worthless and achieve no results at all, if not perhaps results opposite to what you expect. As you get used to this idea, you start more and more to concentrate not on the results, but on the value, the rightness, the truth of the work itself." So as you are able to accept this, not just that bad things happen in the world, but that your own vision of a better world might never materialize, and or that your work may not contribute to the realization of that world, you are able to avoid the disillusionment and bitterness that I've seen in some of my colleagues that comes with holding onto your particular vision too tightly. So everything that I've said resonates with Viktor Frankl's idea about tragic optimism, which are thoughts that he developed in a lecture, and it was added to as a postscript to his book, Woman's Search for Meaning. Tragic optimism is about having hope, about finding meaning even in the most extreme of circumstances and where there's no certainty, and possibly even, apparently no hope. It is about saying yes to meaning as a form of freedom that can never be taken away. It is not toxic positivity. It acknowledges negative dynamics and negative emotions in our lives. So much for the first of my strategies about navigating a landscape of change. The second is about staying present and engaged. So even as we have this vision that takes us forward, and even with holding onto it lightly, there will be times when we feel alienated and down and dispirited. We find ourselves staring into the glassy surface of our laptops, struggling with a piece of academic writing or perhaps a presentation for a lecture, and wondering whether it is worth it all. Nobody is ever going to read my work. I only have X number of citations. Or the students never read the cases or the preparatory material. I feel like I'm talking to a black hole. Given the overlapping existential crises of the world, perhaps I should just chuck it all and find a job as a real essential worker. So there's a feature of academic life that renders us vulnerable to alienation, and that is that a lot of our work is mental. We live in our heads. For legal scholars, I'm sure you've heard it said, you know, the law library is your laboratory. So this is even more pronounced. And now that we have all this material available online, you don't even need to go to the library. You just sit at your desk and it's all at your fingertips, provided that you get the password right. Then it isn't a problem if you can't get the password right. So since hard lockdown and emergency road teaching, which is now metamorphosed into all forms of blended learning and online learning, we don't even necessarily engage physically face-to-face with our students. We encounter them as names in long lists of participants, or perhaps if the class is small enough, we see their faces for a bit of time on the streaming video. Tea room small talk has shrunk to the few die-hard staffers, and I've observed it's usually the older generation, who doggedly stick to the old-fashioned idea of coming into work every day. I feel sorry for my colleagues who have to chair online meetings, unable to read the body language of the names on the screen, and they plaintively ask, is everybody still with me? Our academic communities have been shattered. And I think this is a worrying trend and not conducive to a flourishing life as an academic. So how do you work around this? I think it's really important to feel like you belong, to be recognized and witnessed, that need is as strong as ever. And I'm sure that there are many ways in which colleagues are working with us imaginatively that I'm not aware. But I just wanted to share three ways in which, in my own life, I've been able to cope with this problem. And they relate to investments that I've made earlier on in my academic career about connecting with people and organizations at the coalface of the causes I care about, learning to undertake empirical research, and completing my legal training. So in about 2009, I was asked to, up until that point, I'd started at Wits, I was a lecturer, I did research, I taught students. And then I decided I don't just want to be a black letter lawyer, I want to be more than that. And I want to actually engage with the people who are really fighting the fight. And a chance came along, the Centre for Applied Legal Studies was doing a project on coal mining in Ermelo, and they needed somebody to jump in and pull the project together, and I said, yes, that's me. And I pulled together all the observations that the CLES researchers had done. I engaged the battleurs, which is this amazing organization, trainee pilots that want to fly, and you fly over and you take pictures of the coal fields, and pulled this report together. And that really was the start for me in 2009 of starting to work closely with environmental NGOs and CBOs and trying to understand how I could support their work and their work could enliven mine. So this meant a lot of volunteer time, a lot of attending meetings, going on field trips, going on toxic tours to the West Rand, volunteering at events. In 2016 and 2017, when Melissa Fourie of the Centre for Environmental Rights asked me to serve on the board of that organization, and then later to chair it, this way of working received a big boost. And during the 6 years that I volunteered to do this, I learned so much, not only about how environmental conflicts arise and evolve, but also what it takes to establish and sustain a civil society institution like the Centre for Environmental Rights. And I'm thinking here of a range of institutional investments, such as policies, ensuring workplace well-being, leadership succession, strategic planning, funders. Most importantly, this service gave me insights into environmental law in action that I would never have been exposed to if I stayed at home, laboring at my laptop while I trawled online library resources. Over the years, I've become known in that community. I belong to that tribe. And these connections sustain and enrich me even as the academic communities within my own institution have weakened. The other investment I made was to enroll for a postgraduate diploma in tertiary education in the Wits School of Education. And this took me completely outside of the discipline of law. I completed a module, the curriculum included a module on research methodologies, and that helped me overcome my trepidation to do empirical research. And my doctoral thesis, in fact, wasn't on law at all. It was on professional identity and discourse theory and how a sense of professional identity is communicated. So now, as a supervisor, I'm confident to supervise projects that involve some level of empirical research. In fact, I encourage my students to do this because it enlivens our understanding of law, as it expands our knowledge of the law in action. It's exciting, it's fun, it often throws up really surprising things. Empirical research, I found both as a supervisor and for my students, helps us to develop deeper meaning around a project. Now the third investment, and I must be careful here how much I share about myself, was completing my legal training, which I completed last year. So as Mhlantla indicated, my first degree wasn't in law. My first degree was in music at what was then the University of Port Elizabeth. The cello was my major. But I soon realized that if I didn't want to spend my whole life counting 1, 2, 3, 4 in a primary school, I needed to make another plan. So I started studying law for non-degree purposes at UNISA, and then completed the degree 2 years later. So I had my music degree and I had my law degree. At the same time, I decided at that point that I needed to move to where the exciting things were in Gauteng, and I sent my CV off to about 50 law firms looking for articles, and didn't get any joy. I was not successful at all. So I arrived in Pretoria. Without a job. But within a few months, I was able to get a job at a consultancy that drafted legislation. They were engaged by the Department of Transport. And recently, when I had to renew my license this past weekend at the offices of the Road Traffic Management Corporations, I was sitting there and thinking, wow, I actually drafted the first draft of this bill that established this organization. Yeah, so I worked for them for a while. I got a job at UNISA in a niche unit called the Unit for International and Comparative Law. And then I got the job at Wits. So I didn't ever have a chance to complete my legal training, to get articles or to do pupillage. And then, life happened. I got married, I had children, and the thought of, not being employed, not having any kind of income, it just seemed impossible. In about 2006, one of my colleagues said, well, you should just get admitted. Just go to the court and get admitted as an advocate. So Advocate Liz Pickera, thank you very much. You helped me do that. And Attorney Charles de Matos-Ala, they forced me to go and just get admitted as an advocate, but I hadn't done the training. I mean, I was in the end, very grateful for that, because now the whole regime obviously has changed. Anyway, long story short, it took me a long time to pick up the court order. I won't say how long to pick up the court order admitting me as an advocate. But yeah, it just seemed like it wasn't going to happen. But then in about 2016, 2017, my head of school was very supportive. And following the lead of some of my colleagues, I realized it would be possible to do pupillage. And initially tried with a society that was connected to the General Society of General Council of the Bar. It wasn't successful. And so eventually I did it through the National Bar Council last year. And what an amazing experience. What an amazing experience to see, to feel like as an academic, you could go into court and you knew what to do. So I think this is a very important way for a legal academic to be present and engaged. And I want to say something a little bit political. I think that it's not encouraged. Academia doesn't like people to be practitioners, and practitioners are suspicious of academics. And in my training, I realized how incredibly valuable it is. It's incredibly valuable to be engaged. I also encountered young people on the same journey as me who had tried again and 3 or 4 times to get an opportunity to get trained. And I think that's a pity. It's a pity that in our country that we have such a demand for legal services, and it is quite difficult to get that practical training. So maybe that's something that we can think about as a collective. So in any event, I think that's something that should be encouraged. Our law schools should be helping us to do this, and it really has been a wonderful way to stay engaged in this time of change. So, these are the ways I remain present and engaged despite the tumultuous change happening in the world around me. Working with grassroots organizations, empirical research, and completing my legal training. It's helped me to do what Thomas Merton advocates. Concentrate not on the results, but on the value, the rightness, the truth of the work itself. So since the start of this year, I've entered into a new role, which is the chair of the Earth Justice, chair of Earth Justice and Stewardship. And I have to follow in Anel's footsteps and be able to say, so many publications, so many PhDs. But for me, it's a new kind of thing. It's a building thing, and it's about creating a platform, not for me, but for so many other people around me, and giving them a chance to do their PhD or be part of projects. So I'm really excited about it. I'm 6 months into the chair. We're launching the website soon. Yeah, come and join me. I don't want to take you from Anel, but do come and join me. So in conclusion then, change is daunting. Change and uncertainty is daunting, and it can be scary. But change is also exciting. I feel like I'm surfing rather than drowning. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning, but most of the time I feel like I'm surfing. And I hope that I've inspired you to be able to navigate change as an academic with style. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's make that a second round of applause. Tracy, I'm going to do the same that Michelle did, and I'm going to call you by your name. I think that everyone here and also those joining us virtually will agree that it's not only been inspiring, but it's been, in the words of the younger people here, awesome. Thank you so much for having forced me, and I think everyone here this afternoon, to really just step outside of what we are so busy with, and to just think carefully and to slow down, listening to very, very enriching words of wisdom. And what I appreciated so much, we could hear that it's coming from the bottom of your heart. So the honesty was there, and that is what I appreciate and will remember of the second annual Prestige Lecture. And speaking to the substance, I think that part of what you said reminded me of how we tend to get anxious because of change. Change, especially if you feel as if you are not adapting as fast as is required, you feel anxious and you feel as if you are drowning and not surfing. But, and that is the words of Nelson Mandela that I so often recently used also when I spoke to my students, saying it always seems impossible until it's done. It always seems unreachable until you're there. I experience that so often now with the twin boys. When we travel far, it's like, how far still? But then in the end, we're there and we enjoy it, and the journey has actually not been so bad. Tracy, so I am not going to say the final thank you now. I hope that I gave everybody a moment just to have the message sinking in, because it's a lot to take in, and it forces you to self-reflect. It almost feels wrong to ask a question to Tracy, but it feels as if you should be asking questions to yourself. But can I ask can I ask who's ready to pose the first question to Prof Hambi? I would just like also to see whether Ledile is ready to run with the mic, and I would just like to see where the extra mic is. So there's the mic, Ledile, and there's one with Kristen as well. So who's ready to go with a question? I see 3 hands, and I apologize for those who I do not know the names of. But I see Nicoline, I see Maricel, I see Gisela, and then I see a gentleman who I don't know, and I apologize for that. Nicoline, let's start with you. Ledile?
Can I? Okay. Thank you so much, Prof, for the incredible talk. I think we all needed it. I think we all needed to hear a lot of what you said, and I really appreciated it. It certainly was enlightening. I have so many questions written down, so I'll just start maybe with 2. Something you mentioned struck me, and I mean, we see this on Twitter a lot, but you said that there is a cost to resilience. And I was just wondering, and I'm seeing this on Twitter between some of the young academics, but how do we foster an academic dialogue on this issue, you know, the cost of resilience? But not just for academics to be resilient again, but, you know, the cost it has on us as academics and also on us as students. I hope that makes sense. And then the second part is, and I'm sure that there's been a lot of value, but can you share some of the value in having degrees or that are kind of transdisciplinary or educational training in different disciplines? I'd just like to know how has that enriched your research and your kind of role as an academic in our society? Thank you so much.
Let's take 3, and then we have Tracy responding. So Maricel, and then Gisela.
Thank you very much, Prof Tracy. I appreciate listening to you, and it was really also enriching to me. And I was wondering, you mentioned the academic role, and I was thinking of my own research and the research we do at the chair, and also just the rest of the topic of today, the just transition and how we can kind of foster that. And I know, like in the chair, we always talk about the airy-fairy or research towers that academics kind of lock themselves into. And I think you mentioned the laptops and the screens the whole time. And I was just wondering, how can we as academics truly make a difference at a practical level without, for instance, going for legal training? Because that in itself is scary to me, but that might just be my anxiety. Or at a city level, especially as academics in the global south, how can we raise our voices and enrich transition not only for ourselves or for our communities, but in our country or nationally? And how do we bridge this gap between being an academic and having a practical difference made, even if it's not in our lifetime? Thank you.
Gisela?
Thank you very much, Prof Tracy-Field. I really enjoyed it. I just have a question. I want some further elaboration on your argument regarding the importance of hope and some teleological belief, because I argue that if you're a pessimist, it can also be a teleological belief, specifically if you look at Albert Camus' absurdism, Friedrich Nietzsche's nihilism, Sartre's radical freedom, and de Beauvoir's ethics of ambiguity. And in a postmodern society, a lot of people argue that this pessimism is a much better approach than hope, because there's a certain freedom, and when you realize that if you take the nihilistic approach. So how would you argue still in favor of hope as opposed to this pessimistic approach, which is much more prevalent in a postmodern world?
Tracy, are you now the one who needs that minute to think? But you're welcome to respond. The mic is there with you. Can all the other mics just be put off, please? Yes.
Wow, so these are hard questions. So I'm experienced enough not to even attempt the ones that I don't feel like I can answer. So this cost of resilience, Nicolene, is it? Yeah. Look, I think you have to be quite. It's like in an academic context, we go. And if you think of all the, when lockdown happened, 17th of March, whenever it was, I had known about Zoom meetings because I'd been using them with the Center for Environmental Rights. But almost all of my colleagues had never used Zoom in their life. So we had a face-to-face, that was the last time we saw each other, Zoom training session. If you think where academics are now in terms of how good we've become in online teaching and how schooled in all the different programs, the online, I mean, I'm a little bit afraid to teach because I haven't taught this year, but I'm afraid that when I come back, I'm not going to know where to find myself, because the systems are, you know, there's a seminar on this big blue button and this. So, I mean, that's a tremendous gain, but we don't reflect on what's been lost. Okay, so obviously what's been lost is some of the enlivenment and the spontaneous interaction and the learning that can take place when you're in a classroom. So with every gain, there's going to be some kind of cost. You just have to think through, is it worth it in the end? On the question of the degrees, absolutely. I mean, I think that's been a real game changer for me. If I had just stuck with my law degree, I wouldn't be able to do the kind of research, and I wouldn't even be interested. You know, what's interesting for me is to be able to go to political economy or international law or, you know, even economics, and be able to integrate those. So I read very widely, not necessarily have degrees in those things, but because I had that training in the School of Education around social science research methods, which we don't have in law. In law, we learn to do proper legal research, which is important. You need to be able to do that well. But we don't learn how to get a proper representative sample, or, you know, action research versus participant observation, all those kinds of things. So we kind of limit the research we do. I think it's absolutely critical. What I've also, the learning curve I'm on now, that my chair is paired with a colleague who's is a chemical engineer. So we have a paired chair. We say it's a couch sometimes. We sit together on the couch. And, you know, he brings his knowledge and his methodology around hard sciences and much, you know, very strict rules about what counts as a scientific claim. And that's been good, because sometimes in environmental law, we tend to be a bit loose with this stuff, you know. We maybe quote grey literature, or we quote the activist literature, which isn't necessarily based on proper scientific research. So that's been a good thing to, you know, to be imbibed on that. There's another group that I sit on, it's called the Bob Scholl's Knowledge Synthesis Working Group on Water and Sanitation. And there we've got people from many different disciplines. So it's not easy to do interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary work. It's not easy to find a common, it takes a lot of work, but it's absolutely worth it. I really recommend it. Bridging the gap between academia and practice. Look, I think I want to say two things here. You actually don't realize how knowledgeable you are about the law until you go to lay people who haven't been trained in the law. And even you going and talking to them and being in their context and finding out, you know, how they understand things and being able to show them how law frames the problem that they're dealing with. Even that is a contribution. The next step is to actually help them in their struggle. So in environmental law, it's not difficult. There are lots of you know, environmental assessment processes where people need to submit comments. So you might assist them with comments. You don't have to be a trained attorney to do that. You're just helping them with understanding what the points of law are. Otherwise, you know, it can be very confusing not to understand the legal framing of something. So that's how you can contribute. That's how I like to contribute. I've also realized that the way that I can support those organizations is to do really excellent academic research. So to give them, and it's about finding the information, because as academics you can evaluate sources very efficiently. You know what's a good source, you know what's not a good source. Putting those sources together and packaging it for people who are at the coalface, that is a contribution. But you have to never lose your salt as an academic. You have to always be open to another point of view. You can't become too partisan. And the power of the academic space is that you can bring many people together with differing viewpoints. But then you have to be careful about who you give a platform to. In an academic space, you have to provide evidence for your point of view. So it's important to help to get involved at that level, but don't become too partisan. Don't lose your salt as an academic. On pessimism and nihilism, and look, it's a personal choice. I need that. I get too depressed if I have to just immerse myself in that. And I think there's a lot of research to show that if you have like positive energies, there are better outcomes. But I'm sure there's a whole lot of research. Your research sounds fascinating that I haven't engaged with either. It's just a personal choice of mine.
Thank you very much for that responses. Tracy, also for those first round of questions. Sir, we're going to turn to you. Can I just perhaps, there we have Chantel's hand, and we've got John. So if you could perhaps just introduce yourself, then I also can put a name to the face.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Anel. I am Ben Simon Kelu. Yeah, so thank you, Prof. Tracy, for this very insightful presentation, and I am very happy for this particular topic. And I know anytime I see the words just transition and change, so many things always come to my mind because I fell in love with this particular issue of just transition. So allow me to take us into climate change law. And my worry is, what can we as academics do with just transition to a low carbon economy through the phasing out of coal in South Africa, given the fact that the vulnerable and poverty-stricken indigents of South Africa earn a living through the mining jobs. So if now we have to apply just transition, how can we as academics, what is the role we are going to play in order to make the phasing out of coal not to affect the vulnerable and poverty-stricken individuals in South Africa? And as you rightly said, one of your strategies, hope, are we going to base on hope that the change will come? We hope that there will be a change. What are the strategies that are going to be put in place for a real just transition? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I just want to ask a question for the perspective of emerging scholars and mid-level career scholars. Seeing as we live in a global village, some of our research now for under the chair will also present internationally. But we have now, I don't know whether it can be classified as the publish or perish culture, where institutions now charge large sums of money for registration and registration for publishing, registration for workshops, and all of that. How can young and emerging career scholars navigate that kind of change to ensure that our research is not only heard in our area of jurisdiction, but is also accepted internationally? Thanks.
Thank you so much, Prof. So this was a very insightful talk. It actually reminded me when you were talking about hope, a time when one of my friends, we were a bit hopeless, getting to a state of hopelessness, and we even made an inside joke of going to China. I won't mention any names, to go teach English there because we were a bit becoming hopelessness. But getting to my question, you said one of the things that you used to do or that worked for you was networking with some of the organizations and with the people. And I know that used to happen quite a lot at ease before COVID, where we used to go to conferences and meet up with different people. But during COVID now, the whole interaction in person didn't happen a lot. So it's a bit difficult now to engage with people and do the whole networking because everything now happens virtually. So how do we, what's your advice on how we can continue networking with people and getting in touch with other people? Because really connections, one of the things that I learned is that they're very important in academia. And then the second question is that one of the things that you also mentioned is that there seems to be now a bit of a gap between the academics and the student. And I think it's one of the, Prof Barnard will agree with me, it's one of the things that came up in one of the meetings that the academics had with the students at NWU, where the students were indicating that the lectures don't understand them, they don't feel for them, so there seems to be that bit of a gap. So the question is, how do we bridge this gap between the academics and the students, particularly during this time of the pandemic? Because the lectures they feel, or the academics, they feel like we are trying to reach out to you, and then the students, at the other hand, they feel like, but you are not reaching out to us, you are not helping us, you don't get us. How do we bridge that gap? Thank you.
You can respond, Tracy.
Okay, the just transition question. So, there's been a lot of work done on the coal transition in South Africa. I'm going to take my glasses off because I can't see. A lot of work around understanding the needs of the workers in those areas, the work that the TIPS has done, the educational qualifications of those workers, the fact that a lot of them earn more than they would if they weren't working in mining, for example. So, it's how do we as academics contribute to that? If it's your area, you obviously have to really get in touch with all of the literature around just transition. So one of the critiques of that is the just transition framing, as it has been appropriated by institutions like the IFC, is now focusing all our attention on those areas which are, it's the fossil fuel areas, and it actually reinforces fossil fuel interests instead of focusing on the areas where you might have renewable energy. But this is a very difficult conversation to have in South Africa and in Africa, right? Because our GHG emissions is so negligible. It seems to be so unfair that we cannot use those resources. My position is that let's, if it's just going to be for the global north, then it shouldn't happen. But if it lifts people out of, gives them more opportunity, then it's something that we should seriously consider. But we need to do it carefully, and we need to know the science. I was in a colloquium a colloquium discussion meeting last week, and we were talking about the future of gas in South Africa. There's been an enormous amount of work done on modeling gas scenarios. Technical stuff about, LPG, LNG, whether we need it or not, when we need it, only for peak power. And what I realized, and this is maybe what the contribution of legal scholars can be, nobody was doing a lot of research on the political economy. There wasn't any research on, okay, so who's punting a particular point of view? Who is this going to benefit, this position? What are the interests behind it? So I think that is something, we can talk about, as legal scholars, we can talk about obviously the legal framing, compensation mechanisms, how law creates incentives and disincentives, but understanding who is benefiting from particular positions and exposing that is a very valuable contribution. That's what I'm kind of interested in all sorts of environmental work. So I think that's what you can contribute. And then also just to say, as academics, you have to live what you preach. You really have to live what you preach. I see, for example, bottled water. You have to start being the change that you're advocating in terms of your own energy use, your choices. You have to be mindful about it. So that's also how academics can contribute. Emerging scholar. So, yeah, this is, I think it's incredibly, it makes me very angry that scholars in the global south continue to be disadvantaged in these financial ways. And I think about, a cost I had to pay for an open access publication and how I'm sure there's a nice Afrikaans word for it, but I can't think of it now. But I was not very pleased about having to transfer my Global South funds to the Global North for this privilege. So how do you get clever? How do you get noticed? I think you need to find one publication where you're not paying those exorbitant fees, and you need to pick something that it's going to be cited a lot. Like for me, I wrote this case note. It was just a case note on Tabametsi. But because of the climate litigation, there's a lot written about all the Global North cases, but very little written about the Global South cases. That article was picked up because it was the one case note about Tabametsi. So find something that's quite niche that that will be picked up. And then that case note was in fact cited in the IPCC report. So, which I think you told me about. You've got to be clever. You're not playing the game on the same level as other, and it's unfortunate, but that's our lot, and that's why we're made of tough stuff and we are creative. So that would be my advice. Find one niche publication and one thing that is going to get cited a lot. And these, because there are not many African climate litigation cases, it's good to write about those. Okay, networking. I hardly networked at conferences. I'm not very good at it. I'm quite.
I'm not fully agreeing. We've been together in New Zealand. We've been together in the Philippines.
I find
Eastern Cape.
This has all been recorded. I find it quite tiring. It's very draining. Whenever I would go to a conference, I would try to just I would actually stand and just say, okay, let people come to me. People that I'm meant to talk to will come to me, and they do. But I find the networking I've done is to go to people's contexts. You have to become interested in what people are doing, and you go into their context, not the conference. So one of my projects as a chair is I want to write a book about the Verloren Vlei, which is a Ramsar listed site on the Western Cape coast. And it is a fascinating study because it is a story about climate change. So there's a climate change transition. There was an energy transition in the 1980s. The electricity came to this area for the first time, which meant that the farmers could pump groundwater, which completely changed the agriculture in that area, the potato farmers. Now there's another kind of agricultural transition going on where the young farmers don't want to, the sons and the daughters don't want to farm, and now the companies are starting. So there's all sorts of transitions happening. I went there, and I stayed there, and I'm going to go there again and again. And I met the people, and so I'm working with a group of activists because that's my niche. I could be working for the farmers, but you have to actually go there and see the world from their eyes, and that is what I found to be, really helpful. And perhaps my answer is not helpful to you because I'm not. For me, I'm not too interested in the academic networking. That kind of happens. It's difficult. It's all about relationships. Even academic relationships. You'll have meetings where they try and match you up, and then you kind of talk, and then nothing happens. So you have to actually go there. So the chair that I've got now has an honorary appointment at the University of Edinburgh. But nothing's going to happen until I go there and I sit with people and I meet them. So that's my advice to you. Although conferences, find a way of getting into the context and meeting people and just spending time with them. And then the question about students. I'm biased because I'm only dealing with postgraduate students now. But you have to meet them physically. You have to meet them physically from time to time. You can't just sustain relationships online. So, hopefully it matters. It matters having a body in front of you, somebody that you can talk to. I don't know how quickly if it'll ever go back to normal, but that's what I think needs to happen.
Very, very valuable advice and concrete tips, Tracy. I know you traveled far to be here, and it is exhausting to be entertaining questions after such a intensive and lovely talk. So is there anyone with a burning last question? Mishka. And then I am going to conclude and invite you to those physically present, that is, to a small and informal reception. Mishka?
Hi, Prof Tracy. Thank you so much for an interesting discussion. One thing that you've spoken a lot about is the gap between one thing that you mentioned is it actually matters where you stand in terms of this change. And this question sort of relates a lot to John's question. And the one thing that we know is as academics, you're supposed to read quite widely. You're supposed to know a little bit of everything to sort of keep yourself ahead of the curve. And one thing is that sometimes as a very empathetic person, you would like to help. And you know people who could help. How do you sort of get those people to buy into the idea of helping others when they don't necessarily benefit financially, and also to get them to sort of commit to for long periods of time to actually successfully get the change that we need. So, for instance, if we need to help a community with water or pollution, many of the times, as we see, government doesn't or says that they don't have funds to do this. But as researchers, academics, you have ideas on how to help, how to improve. How can you as an academic actually get people from higher up to help you facilitate this change without, losing your hope and trust in people?
Okay, I hope I've understood your question properly. There was a lot in there. But I think what you're talking about is this instinct to help. It's the academics that want to help. They want to help. They want to be out there. They want to see change. So what I have found is that it's not easy to do that as an academic yourself, because you will be pulled apart in 1,000 different directions and you will disappoint people. Because your work is different. So different to the kind of like hands-on stuff that people will need. And in my own life, I have, made promises and then disappointed. So what I found is helpful is to find the people who are doing that and to help them. So either it's an individual, or it's an established organization, and it might be that they put out a call for funding, for example. Women, for example, I don't know if you know that organization, Women in Mining, often put out calls for small grants, and then you can help in that way. But yeah, so you need to be sure you're not, first of all, getting caught in other people's agendas. That's also very easy, and you've got to try and avoid that. But it doesn't necessarily need to. It doesn't have to be a community. It can be an organization. So, for example, the South African Human Rights Commission is interested in a monitoring tool for local governments. I'm interested in studying water cases. So you need to do the homework to find out what is that organization, or what is that community, or what is that individual's agenda. Does it merge with yours? And then how can you support them? So it's taking time to understand how you can help them, which may change your own ideas of what is helpful. So don't come with preconceived ideas about what is helpful. Find something that you know touches your heart, get out there, talk to people, and then you start seeing ways in which you can assist.
Thank you, Tracy. And if I perhaps may add to that, I don't think we should underestimate the role that we play through our research also. There's quite a lot of institutions, NGOs and activist organizations that really depend on reliable legal research, be it with or without social research methods included in that research. So don't feel disheartened, and as if you are not making a difference, Mishka and all of the other emerging researchers here, also through your research and what you will eventually publish, you will definitely in the end make a contribution just by virtue of the areas that you are researching on right now. So Tracy, thank you very, very much. You are based in Johannesburg, and Potchefstroom is another country for those living in the city. And you took the time not only to travel here, but to prepare a very, very thought-provoking talk, which I also think should reach a broader audience. It latches onto some of the things that's been said. Funders, the things that those institutions that fund academic research look at should also be redesigned, really. People in government, because there is also sometimes a hesitancy on the part of decision makers in high positions to turn to academics for assistance, as Mishka said, for free even. So I do hope that we will reach a much, much broader audience with this talk, also through the social media posting. It will be on YouTube forever, Tracy. And you hinted at it, and I don't want to make this personal in any way, but you could get from Tracy's talk that she's pretty much an introvert, and doing what she did today really is taxing and takes a lot of energy out of, and I can say it because people won't believe it, but I can associate with that. So we are really appreciative of what you brought to us and the way in which you did it. We wish you all the very best with the chair. I think and I'm saying this in front of many of my students, not all of them, but many, that you will make an immense difference by your supervision and just having a bunch of young people working with you. It's legacy work. It comes with a huge responsibility, one that I feel on my shoulders every single day, but it's so rewarding. And it means also that hopefully our work will make an impact long after we are no longer here physically. And for everyone who participated this afternoon, thank you very much. I could see that you were attentive. I could sense that you all really appreciated the message that we got this afternoon. Obviously, I couldn't see those that are sitting at home in front of those screens this afternoon, but I do think that for those of us having listened to you, that the message will linger on for some time, and I will certainly be speaking to people about this. I hope that you will travel safely back home. We do have a little gift for you. It's not so little, so I'm not going to do any handover now. I'm going to conclude, and just for one last time, let's please give Prof Tracy Humby the hand of applause she deserves. Thank you, everyone also at home. We will make this available for download during the course of this week. Thanks very much.